Hi guys, Dr. Rob Barrington here with some more nutritional advice and analysis. I wanted to talk this week about insulin resistance and exercise. Now the reason I picked this topic is because I came across quite an interesting paper while I was writing my blog. And it had some quite useful information in it, and I thought I would summarise the information in this paper in this video so that those people that are interested in this topic could perhaps go away and read the paper and get more detail on what I'm going to talk about. So I'll put the link to the paper in the comments box below this video so those people who are interested can follow this up. The paper took a group of healthy, normal weight female subjects and put them into one of three groups. One group was a control group who performed no exercise. Another group was put into an endurance exercise program, and the third group was put into a resistance training program. Now the subjects were given a controlled diet so that the diet couldn't interfere with the observations that the researchers were making, and what they wanted to do is they wanted to see what happened to the insulin sensitivity of the subjects. And what they found is that, as expected, the insulin sensitivity of the subjects who were performing endurance exercise and resistance training improved relative to the control group, and that was to be expected. However, a number of other things in this paper were also found, which I found quite interesting. The first thing was that the subjects, when the researchers analysed the insulin sensitivity of the subjects, but they expressed the insulin sensitivity per unit of fat-free mass, in other words, per unit of muscle. What they actually found was that the endurance training group improved their insulin sensitivity, but the resistance training group didn't. Now that would indicate that what's actually happened here is that the insulin sensitivity of the endurance group has improved because the efficiency of the muscles to soak up glucose from the blood, to absorb glucose, to reduce the blood glucose levels has improved. But in the resistance training group, that was not the case. The muscle hasn't actually increased in efficiency. What's actually happened is the insulin sensitivity has improved because there is more muscle. Now this is quite interesting because it suggests that resistance training and endurance training have quite different effects on insulin sensitivity in terms of the way they achieve that goal. Resistance training seems to increase, well, it does increase muscle mass, and it's the increasing of the muscle mass that causes the reduction in blood glucose levels. If you imagine there was X amount of glucose transporters per myocyte, if you increase the amount of myocytes, you've increased the amount of glucose transporters, so therefore blood glucose levels go down. If you imagine endurance training, what you're actually doing, if you've got X amount of glucose transporters on the myocytes, the number of myocytes stay the same, but you actually increase the amount of transporters, so you now have X times 2 transporters. So these two training methods appear to improve insulin sensitivity in different ways, which suggests that if you could combine the two and you could increase your endurance capacity, increase the ability of the muscle cells to uptake glucose from the blood, and you could also increase your muscle mass, you may actually have a synergistic effect on insulin resistance, and that may be a better way of actually lowering blood glucose levels if, for example, you had problems with that because you were obese or you had type 2 diabetes. Now bear in mind these subjects were healthy, so that you can't always extrapolate what happens in a healthy person to what happens to somebody who has a disease, but nonetheless, that is quite interesting that these two different types of exercise have different effects. Another interesting thing in this paper was that the subjects who underwent endurance training actually didn't have a decrease in the intramuscular lipids that were in their between their muscle cells in their skeletal muscle. Now, if we go back to what causes insulin resistance, we have to say we don't actually know. But one of the theories is that there is a build-up of lipids within the tissues of the body, and these lipids interfere with the insulin cascade within the cells. what you often find is that those people who are obese or have type 2 diabetes, when they reduce their insulin, when they improve their insulin sensitivity, for example through diet, what tends to happen is the intramuscular lipid level decreases. Now, that has led some people to think that the intramuscular lipids are involved in insulin sensitivity, and there is good evidence for that. But what actually you find when you look at endurance trained athletes is that they have high levels of intramuscular lipids because they are used as a source of fuel. If you imagine those people who go out and perform exercise, they tend to have more glycogen in their muscles because they supercompensate for the exercise by storing more glycogen. Now, endurance trained athletes use a lot of fatty acids as a source of fuel, so their skeletal muscle stores more fatty acids intramuscularly between the myocytes, so it's there ready as a source of fuel when they go and perform their exercise. And what these researchers found was that the level of intramuscular lipids didn't decrease in the endurance-trained athletes, despite the fact that their insulin sensitivity improved. And that's quite interesting, because what it suggests is that it's not actually the fatty acids in the muscle tissue that is causing the insulin insensitivity in obese and type 2 diabetics. It actually suggests that that's actually a symptom of something else that's causing the insulin resistance. And I found that quite interesting, because it does suggest that it's not actually the lipids per se that's causing the effect, but there's something else that's causing both the accumulation of the lipids and the insulin sensitivity. And what I would suggest it possibly is the fact that the oxidative capacity of myocytes, of muscle cells in the obese and in type 2 diabetics reduces. And because the oxidative capacity goes down, the fatty acids that would normally be oxidized in those cells actually accumulate in the muscle tissue, and that's why the intramuscular lipid levels go up in these types of diseases. When you undergo endurance training, you increase the oxidative capacity of the myocytes, of the muscle cells, and that then causes the level of lipids to go down generally. But if you're performing high level of endurance training, you might actually increase the oxidative capacity, but the muscle may also supercompensate and store more lipids in the myocyte. So it's actually the oxidative capacity of the muscle cells that is causing the decrease in the oxidative capacity of the muscle cells that may be causing the insulin sensitivity, and not actually the intramuscular, the level of intramuscular lipids. So that was another thing that was quite interesting about that paper. And if you want to have a read of the details of that, I suggest if you want more details that you do have a good look at that paper. But there was another quite interesting thing in this paper as well. These women performed resistance training or endurance training for 6 months, but they lost no weight compared to the control group. Now, you may expect those that undertake resistance training not to lose weight, and that is because they generally put muscle on. So people who undergo resistance training actually generally put body weight on. But when you look at endurance training, you would expect them to lose body fat, and these subjects didn't. Neither the endurance group nor the resistance training group lost weight compared to the control group, and this supports what I've been trying to say for a long time, is that I think that exercise is actually quite an inefficient way to cause body fat loss. I think if you look at the literature as a whole, those people that are effective at reducing their body weight, reducing their body fat levels, improving their body composition, generally are those people that follow a healthy diet. Exercise, of course, can increase your fitness levels. It can improve the suppleness of your joints and your flexibility of your muscles, and it can also improve your body composition because it can add muscle. But is it good at reducing body fat levels? Well, from what I've read, from the evidence that I've seen, I would suggest that it's actually diet that is the best way to decrease your body fat levels. And I think if we look at this in another way, it's poor diet that causes us to get fat, and therefore what we have to do to reverse that increase in body weight is to actually get rid of the poor quality diet and eat a high quality diet. And this is just more evidence that supports what I've been trying to say, that I don't think exercise is actually a very good way of improving your body fat levels. I think diet is a much more effective way Now, that's not to say that exercise isn't beneficial. I do think exercise has a preventative effect against gaining body fat. I think if you're lean and you perform exercise, on a regular basis, I think you are less likely to become overweight. But once you are overweight, I don't think exercise is actually a very good way of losing body fat. And if this relates to the fact that your metabolism is damaged after you've become, if you're obese or if you've got type 2 diabetes, you actually have an underlying metabolic dysfunction, and that metabolic dysfunction prevents you using stored substrates, in other words your body fat, as a source of energy, and that's because you have raised levels of blood glucose, and those raised levels of blood glucose cause high insulin levels. And insulin is an anabolic hormone, and it doesn't allow catabolic pathways to function correctly. So this is why exercise is not a very good way of losing body fat once you have become fat. It may be a very good way of preventing the accumulation of body fat because it maintains your insulin sensitivity. But once you've got into that metabolic dysfunction, you really need to start reversing the insulin sensitivity, and the best way, the insulin insensitivity, and the best way to do that, I think, is through diet. And I think the literature really does support that. There have been many studies that have compared diet groups in terms of the quality of the diet, not calorie restriction, diet groups with diet and exercise groups, and the diet groups always generally lose the same amount of body weight, same amount of body fat as the exercise and diet group, which indicates that the exercise is really having no additional effects. Now, this obviously you do have to take into account the type of exercise and how long you perform it for and how intensely. But I think as a generalisation, if you think you're going to be able to go to the gym, you think you're going to be able to do a bit of exercise to improve your body composition, I think a better strategy would be to look at your diet and improve the general quality of your diet. I think that would be a much better way of improving your body composition. So this paper was really it was a little bit of a gold mine in terms of information. So if you want to have a comparison of endurance training with resistance training in a little bit more detail, I do suggest you have a look at this paper. It's quite nice to read. It's not one of those papers that's difficult to understand. It is actually quite nicely written, which is surprising these days, because many papers are quite difficult to understand. But this is quite an easy one to understand. Another thing to suggest is that to be careful, because the women that we used in this study were already of normal weight, so it's very difficult. You've got to be very careful. You try and extrapolate that to obese subjects, or perhaps people with metabolic syndrome or type 2 diabetes. But there is some information in there that's quite useful, and I think it would be worthwhile reading that if this is something that you're interested in. I have summarised the information, so if you feel that you don't want to read the paper, you probably won't get that much extra out. Other than some of the details about how much weight, how much their insulin sensitivity improved, etc. It depends how much information you really want. But I would suggest you at least read the abstract, because the abstract contains most of the information in the paper anyway. I hope that was interesting. If you have any comments on this, if you leave a comment in the comments box below, as always, I will try to get back to you, and I will probably see you next week for another video. In the meantime, take care.